Let's get the right text. Fit on the page. Don't need to hear myself. All right. Well, just give it a second for anyone else to log in. As always, I like to give a little bit of extra buffer because I know the technology, well, it doesn't just make my life inconvenient sometimes, it makes everyone else's life inconvenient occasionally too. So, of course, I'm lamenting the inconveniences while still being able to use this device to share and reach out, and do things with Torah and Judaism that I wouldn't have done 20 years ago, let alone 30 or 40 years ago. So as much as I complain, it is still an incredible blessing. So we should be glad we've got it, and we'll give it just a little bit longer before people can log in. I'll go ahead and give you a little hint. If you are looking at the screen already, you may notice that we are in the book of Deuteronomy on my screen. That is not a mistake. That is what we are going to look at. We are going to have the exceptional experience of looking at the maftir for today, for this week rather. This coming Shabbat, we will be looking at Shabbat Zachor. And as we'll talk about, and as you can probably already read, that deals with the topic of Amalek. So we are going to take a look at the text that is used for that maftir this coming Shabbat for our root text, and then we'll take it from there. All right, well, that should have given us enough of a buffer. If anyone's coming in late now to Zoom or YouTube, I'm sure they'll be able to pick it up just fine. And if not, well, that's what the recording is for. They can go back and check the beginning. So good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for taking some time out of your schedule to study a little Torah with me. And we are going to be looking at the maftir for this week's Torah. Now, the maftir is a section that is normally taken from the tail end of the regular Torah reading, of the regular parasha, the regular Torah portion. However, there are some events, such as holidays, where the maftir will be taken from a different place, very often from the section of Pinchas, the book of Numbers, dealing with sacrifices. But there are also occasions where the maftir was taken seemingly at random. But of course, nothing is truly random. And one of those places is in our calendar leading up towards the holiday of Pesach. There are 4 special parshiot, 4 special maftirs that are used. Well, we'll look at that in our commentary, but they're used to trigger different emotions, different ideas during this month and a half going in towards Pesach. So we're going to look at the one for this week. Last week was Parashat Shekalim. This week is Parashat Zachor. So we're going to look at that. And as the maftir in these special circumstances doesn't have to come from the end of the regular weekly reading, we are going to be jumping from Exodus all the way to the book of Deuteronomy. As you can see, Deuteronomy 25, verse 17. Now we're going to read it. Then I'll give you a little bit of a Peshat understanding of why we're reading it at this time. And then we're going to delve into what it can actually tell us a little bit more deeply than just do what it says. So, verse 17, we begin. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. And right away, Zachor, we can immediately see why this is called Zachor, because it's the first word. How undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary, and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when your God, Adonai, grants you safety from all of your enemies around you, in the land your God, Adonai, is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. So, let's talk about the Peshat, the sort of straightforward understanding of what's going on here. We are receiving a command, Zachor, remember, to remember what Amalek did. Amalek, as was Summarized here was another tribe that attacked the Israelites as we were leaving Egypt. Just as we had gotten out, if you will, while things were still quite difficult for us, as Deuteronomy is explaining, they attacked. And they didn't just attack, they specifically attacked the ones in the back, the stragglers, as is rendered here. It's the tail end of a caravan. Excuse me. So this is a common technique, if you will, for marauders, because the people who are at the front of the caravan are usually the stronger, healthier people. That's why they are forging ahead. They don't have to pause as much. They don't need as many rests. And also because of their strength, when they reach the campsite, they will set up the camp. And that way, the people who are either elderly or young or sick or otherwise unable to keep up at that same pace, they will eventually come into the camp, finding things already arranged, and just the journey is enough for them, and less work is required of them. However, of course, this does mean that the people at the tail end of the caravan are much more vulnerable. They are not the strongest fighters. They are not going to be the people best capable of defending themselves. And Amalek is being uh, uh, shamed here for singling out those that were at that end of the caravan, for deliberately attacking the weak, for attacking people who pose no threat to them. And as such, we are being told that not only must we remember what Amalek did, but we also, in verse 19, are commanded to blot out their name, to erase their name from under heaven. Now, yes, it is ironic, and we'll have to point it out because, this is just one of those things that always needs to be shared. It is ironic that nobody would remember Amalek had it not been for the Torah, meaning that it is precisely because of our drive to remember what they did that their name has not been blotted out. If we had simply said, well, that was terrible, and then not recounted the story, there would be no memory of Amalek on the face of the earth. It would be wiped out. But this is not saying just that we should wipe it out in a way of propaganda, of expunging it from history, wiping it out as some sort of 1984 Big Brother totalitarian technique. This is saying that we need to make sure that the ideas of Amalek, the memory of them, meaning the memory of their culture as a viable and worthwhile pattern, must be wiped out. And that means that while we are not commanded to face Amalek today, since there are no Amalekites in the technical legal sense of the word, we are nonetheless required to speak up about any Amalekite-like behavior. And that is something that our commentary is going to help us with. But before we dive into that commentary, you're probably wondering, why are we reading this at this time of year? Because after all, it comes in the book of Deuteronomy, but the Deuteronomy passage here does not tell us when we are meant to remember Amalek. Maybe this should be a daily recitation. Maybe this should be an hourly recitation. Maybe we should have a little necklace that says Amalek on it. I mean, why are we fulfilling this commandment at this particular time of the year? Well, that is because there is a connection between the Amalekites and Haman. Haman, the main villain from the story of Purim, is considered by rabbinic tradition a descendant of the Amalekites. He is called an Agagite in the English, and Agag was the last named king of the Amaleks that was found during the time of Saul. So the line connecting the two is fairly substantial, that he would be a descendant of Agag, and thus he is an inheritor of the Amalekite behavior. We also can say that he is an Amalekite, certainly in character. And as such, what you find is that in this Shabbat coming up prior to the holiday of Purim, we are remembering the Amalekites because Purim is the holiday where the most Amalekite behavior takes place. So this way we are fulfilling the commandment of remembering what the Amalekites did at a time when we can really highlight the overall Amalekite theme through the character of Haman and through the holiday of Purim. And that will be our focus as we go forward. All right. Any questions or comments over this short piece of text before we dive into our commentary? Okay, then let's go ahead and see what we've got. Now, we have a rather unusual thing. This is well, excerpts from what is most likely a sermon written back in the Middle Ages in Spain. We don't have many such surviving documents. Giving of sermons was a very rare activity until the modernish period. And all the more so, many of them that may have been given were not written down. This one is from one of the great Spanish sages. And as we'll see, the language, even in translation, may not be exactly the way we would put things in modern English, but hopefully we will be able to navigate through it and see that there is a great deal for us to still learn, even 800 years later. So we're going to begin with our opening passage. Remember what Amalek did to you, our passage from Deuteronomy. Now, our sages made 4 parshiot, 4 special Torah sections: shekels, remembrance, the red heifer, and the month, during the month of Adar, meaning that all 4 of these are scattered throughout the month of Adar, the month that we are currently in. Immediately after the shekels, meaning Shabbat Shekalim, which was last week, remembrance is read, Zachor, concerning Amalek. That's what we just looked at. That is to say, first they gave the shekels to the temple for the sacrifices. With this, one erased Amalek from the world. All right, so again, we're going to have to unpack this as we go, because this is probably a slightly abbreviated version of what might have been taught in more detail. What he is trying to say is that the parashat of Shekalim comes before the parasha of Zachor, remembering Amalek, because through the mitzvah of donating the shekel, which was given for the temple service, we erased Amalek from the world. That when the Torah tells us to erase Amalek, we have done so through the shekels. Now, how does that work? Well, the shekels were an atonement and redemption for Israel from the shekels that Haman wanted to give for Israel to Ahasuerus for the destruction of Israel. So, in the story of Purim, Haman essentially tries to bribe Ahasuerus in order to allow him to destroy Israel. And the idea is that the shekels that we gave for the temple service, long before the story of Haman even took place, because during the story of Haman there was no temple, that long before all of that took place, we were giving the half shekel as part of our normal process, that all of that was a preemptive atonement and redemption process that allowed us to then be saved from the shekels, the silver, that was going to be spent by Haman to destroy us. Now, that may seem like it's out of sequence, but as he explains, the Holy One always sends the remedy before, before the plague. This is an aphorism found in many Jewish ideas, that when there is a catastrophe looming, there is always something that has begun to make it avoidable before it happens. The other way this is often referred to in the modern vernacular is when God closes a door, he opens a window. Or before God closes a door, he opens a window, meaning that there is this opportunity for change that will mitigate the problems that are about to happen. So too, the Holy One commanded to give shekels to abrogate Haman's shekels. Therefore, we must remember Amalek and his descendant Haman for ill every year. Okay, so the short of this structure of these 2 passages, Shekalim followed by Zachor, is that by remembering how we gave those shekels and by giving the shekels back when we could, we were actually setting the stage for ourselves to be redeemed from the blood money that Haman was trying to give Ahasuerus for our destruction. So we had already anticipated, if you will, God had already anticipated, if you will, this coming catastrophe, and had given us the means to escape its dire result. Now, just out of completeness, the other two parshiot, the red heifer, para aduma, and the month, Chodesh, those are the other two special maftir readings that are done, and they are concerned more with the holiday of Pesach in particular, because the red heifer is reminding us about the purity legislation, which was very important for bringing a Passover sacrifice. And then, of course, HaChodesh is announcing the new month of Nisan, in which Pesach will happen as sort of our last minute alarm. If the red heifer is the first ringing of the alarm, then after we've snoozed, HaChodesh comes along to say, hey guys, Pesach is literally around the corner. Really, get cracking. This is important. Okay, so let's go ahead though and go back to our Amalek discussion. My mouse is, there it is. Remember Amalek with your mouth and curse him. Back to this idea that we have to remember him from bad. Now, what is it that he did that we're remembering? Well, we've got the plain text of the Torah that describes the war and the attacks, but we also have midrashim. And the midrashim are going to be used to fill in not just a historical idea of what he might have done, but more importantly, to look at things that we would want to condemn should we see them be done. It's very important to remember that midrashim and rabbinic homiletics were not written in order to convince people of the true account of the events. This was not journalism. This was not modern history. This was instead intended to describe a situation and put a proper emotional valence to it, a understanding of the rightness or wrongness to it, or of our disgust to it, in order that we would then draw the right conclusions. In this particular case, that we not behave like Amalek, and that we condemn those who behave like Amalek, whether they be Jews or whether they be non-Jews. So what's being described here is not just a description of the events as they happened, and that's the way it is kind of thing. No, this is a description of the overall import, the overall meaning of the events, in order to guide our own moral and ethical behavior. And as you'll see, well, there's some pretty unethical things going on. So what was wrong with Amalek? Well, he dwelled very far from Israel, behind 7 kings, meaning that he was not the closest tribe to the Israelites. And he went over all 7 kings and killed many Israelites. So he was not the nearest person to us, not right up on the border at that particular moment. And yet he went out of his way, bypassing these others who might have had a more legitimate fear of us, in order to attack. All right, strike one. He took the men and cut off their private parts, using the euphemism here. He threw their parts toward heaven and told the Holy One to take the circumcised parts that he had commanded, even though he had seen the great miracles that the Holy One had done for Israel. All right, so here is the audacity that is being highlighted in the Midrash, that in the act of removing those parts from the victims, he would then, Amalek as a tribe would then throw those into the air, basically deliberately flaunting at God of, you wanted people to have Brit Milah, to be circumcised on this part? Well, then you take it, you keep it. Obviously, of course, God doesn't reach down from heaven and grab things in midair, because that's completely misunderstanding. But that's the whole point, is that this is a complete renunciation, a complete rejection of the concept of God in the world, as God as Redeemer, as God as the performer of miracles. This is highlighting the lack of yirah, of fear, that was mentioned back in our Torah reading, that Amalek did not fear God. Now, we don't expect Amalek to be Jewish. We don't expect Amalek to be pious. Any country has their own way of worshiping God, of respecting God, and that is the point. We do expect a certain level of shared humility in the face of, well, all that is and all that God is. Um, and Amalek seems to be completely at odds with that. Not just an enemy of Israel, but an enemy directly of God, God's self. And that is a much deeper problem in the eyes of the commentaries. Now, continue on, because that's sort of strike two. All of the kings were afraid to touch Israel, meaning that Amalek, had seen all the miracles and nonetheless decided to not only attack, but to do so in such an just chutzpahdik way towards God, of basically daring God to do anything in retaliation. Well, that was counter to the way all the other kings who might have been anxious about Israel were behaving. But once Amalek did this, however, Amalek gave all the kings heart to attack Israel. So Amalek, by attacking, not only does his own damage directly against us, but also sort of breaks the dam of other people wanting to attack as well. That where others had seen what had happened in Egypt and had been circumspect, that they were not prepared to tackle with Israel given what had happened to Egypt, which was a far greater kingdom than them. Once Amalek breaks the ice, crosses that line, then all of the other nations go, oh, okay, so I guess sometimes we can attack Israel. And of course, that begins the sequence of conflicts and confrontations, well, which continues until this day. So Amalek is quite a problem for all of these different reasons. But the Midrash has to ask a few other questions. Why did Amalek not come against Israel when Israel went down to Egypt and they were still few in number? So Midrash, in typical fashion, wants to ask the interesting question that some people might not have considered, but certainly is worth considering, which is Amalek was already around before Israel went down to Egypt. When Israel went down to Egypt, there were only like 70 people. Why not just attack us then and wipe us out? Surely that would have been a much easier thing to accomplish. Well, we're going to get a few answers. Some sages said, Amalek said, because he could not do evil with 400 Egyptian people that went to meet Jacob. We know that when Joseph sent for Jacob to come down, that there was an entourage, the chariots and wagons that went with him, went with Jacob. So that provided a bodyguard, if you will, that would keep Amalek from attacking. So again, this would be true to their nature. Amalek attacks where they find weakness, and they saw too much strength from the Egyptians and didn't want to tackle with Egypt as a nation, so they avoided attacking. But there are alternative explanations. Some sages say that he did not want to attack such a small group. He thought it would be an embarrassment, that wiping out a group of 70 people is not exactly the kind of thing that stands out on your trophy board. It is sort of a petty, small sort of thing that is only going to make you look weak for attacking such a weak group of people. This hasn't stopped everybody who leans towards the bullyish kind of way of living, but potentially this was also something that made them reconsider. Some sages said, but Amalek said, if I, Amalek, were to destroy Israel from the world, and they would thus not serve Egypt, then I would have to serve Egypt. Why? What's his thinking there? Since the Holy One said to Abraham, your descendants have to serve Egypt. Amalek was also a descendant of Abraham. Isaac's son was Esau, the father of Amalek. So Amalek was the great-grandson, as a tribal leader, of Abraham. And they would have known that God had made this idea that we would be strangers in a strange land and that we would be enslaved. And if we wipe out the group of people that are about to become that group, that enslaved group, well, then someone else has to take their place. Because after all, if God made it a prophecy, then it's going to be fulfilled somehow. And well, if you wipe out one of the descendants of Abraham, meaning Jacob and family, then another descendant of Abraham is going to have to step into that spot. And that means Amalek would potentially be the group that would have to go do it. So Amalek was not going to attack us before we had had our servitude in order to save themselves. So from all of these different categories, we can see different attributes of Amalekite thinking that our sages are condemning. One, the idea that they wouldn't attack because they were afraid of this larger force, which means that when something is actually needing to be done, we should not show fear. When something is not needing to be done, of course, we shouldn't be attacking in the first place. Likewise, with the idea of not attacking a small group, again, if it is necessary, then it is necessary. If it is important for the army to take out a terrorist, it doesn't matter whether there's one terrorist or 20 terrorists. You do what you need to remove them from committing any acts of terror. And you don't worry about it as though it were earning you a trophy or earning you praise or honor. You're doing just what is necessary. And likewise, to allow someone else to go into that period of enslavement just to save yourself, knowing that eventually you would attack and try to kill them, well, that is an ultimate statement of cowardice. Okay, let's move on though, in order to see how it was that the Amalekites were able to attack us and how this then ties into the story of Haman. When the Israelites are negligent in the commandments, then Amalek has power over Israel. So this is sort of a general aphorism, and we're going to see how it applied in the past and how it had been applied in Haman's time. So too, Israel had the cloud around them in the wilderness, so that no bow and arrow could do anything to Israel. The idea being that while we were protected by the cloud in the wilderness, we were completely immune to attack. Obviously, Amalekites did attack and they did cause death. What happened? Since the cloud did not allow anything evil to happen to Israel, the cloud threw out the Israelite evildoers who were in the wilderness, and it is these that Amalek killed. So the idea being that if it protected us from evil, it also protected us from our own evil, meaning that when people in Israel chose to do something wrong, they were shunted outside. They were removed from the cloud's protection. And those were the people who were then attacked. Now, note that even though this Midrash is saying that the people that the Amalekites killed were not good people because they were outside of the cloud's protection, nonetheless, their behavior, the Amalekites' behavior, was reprehensible. And as much as we may wish for somebody to change their evil ways, we do not wish for someone to simply be murdered by some other group engaging in evil. That is not our conception of justice. Now, what does this have to do with our comparison to Purim? So too with Haman, the descendant of Amalek. The Israelites were evil and ate at the banquet of Achashverosh. Haman rose up and wanted to kill them. Some sages said that they bowed down to the image. So the question always comes, what did the Jews do to deserve Haman? How is it that this was even on the table as a possibility? Now, the actual text of the book of Esther doesn't describe any particular crimes of the Israelites. The people who lived in the Persian Empire are not explicitly called out as being wicked or wrong. However, there are some hints or clues in the first chapter in particular that if everybody was participating in the party that Ahasuerus threw, then so too many of the Judeans, the people who were the Yehudim, the what we would now call Jews, who were scattered around the Persian Empire, they too would have participated. And since we know that it would have been a decadent and non-kosher affair, that would mean they were transgressing. And likewise, since we know that there would have been idolatry present, then they were probably going along with the idolatry of the Persians as well. So this essentially opens the door for the catastrophe that is about to follow. Does that mean that they were all deserving of the death penalty? Absolutely not. But it does mean that when we loosen ourselves from the teachings of God, we do create vulnerabilities within our community. We do create problems that can then be exploited by our enemies. And this, unfortunately, is something that continues right up to this day. Therefore, Haman had some power to kill them, as the verse tells us about Haman, 3 ways to destroy, massacre, and to exterminate. The first, to destroy, means that Haman wanted to destroy the Torah and the commandments of Israel. To massacre means he wanted to destroy their bodies, literally kill. And to exterminate means he wanted to destroy their goods and money. So this is a common midrashic technique. You find a seemingly redundant set of verbs: destroy, massacre, exterminate. Okay, wouldn't just one of those be fine? And then you find a idea that each one of those terms would represent, and then you explain from there. So that's what the author has done. Destroy the Torah, destroy our bodies, destroy our stuff. Now, why do we have these three? It could be because destroy, massacre, and exterminate naturally lend themselves to that. Or it could be that there are things we do on Purim that seem to relate to those three ideas, which can then be remembered through this destroy, massacre, exterminate trilogy. How so? Well, therefore Israel does 3 things on Purim. First, we read the book of Esther. This is related to their desire to remove the Torah from us. So, since they tried to destroy Torah from us, we specifically engage in study and in recitation of the text from the Tanakh, from the Bible, as a way of saying, you failed, right? You did not succeed. Here we are, still reading, still learning, and still making this a centerpiece of our life. The second is that Haman wanted to destroy their bodies. Therefore, we drink and eat well to make the body rejoice on Purim. You wanted us dead? Ha! Not only are we not dead, but we are strong, healthy, and celebrating in bodily ways. Remembering, of course, that Judaism doesn't have a problem with bodily celebration in the proper moderation. Today's not exactly the day when we're going to go through the whole discussion of how to get that moderation. I've covered that elsewhere, and be more than happy to talk to anyone who wants guidance on a proper measured celebration for Purim. And the third thing Haman wanted to destroy was the goods and money of Israel. Therefore, we send presents to the paupers and poor people. So this summarizes really the 3/4 main commandments that we get for Purim: the reading of the book of Esther, the celebration in our Seudah of our feast, and the giving of gifts to our friends as well as to the poor. So in these 4 things, we overcome the 4 attempted destruction of Haman. And this, really does fit quite well, because when Haman is telling Ahasuerus that he wants to kill the Israelites, he points to the fact that we do things differently. When Haman wants to kill us and our bodies, well, that one is pretty straightforward. And then there is a great deal of discussion about the taking, the seizing of our property as part of his plan. And to see in those 3 goals of Haman, the 3 underlying reasons for how we celebrate Purim, I think is a very clever insight for us to follow. Okay, just take care of the body a little. All right. Now, he does want to go into a little more detail on this whole eating and drinking. Why did our sages make eating and drinking wine an essential part of Purim? And with other holidays, they did not make eating and drinking essential. That is to say, while we do have nice meals for other holidays, and certainly we have Kiddush as a part of most other holidays, it does not have the same status as a formal mitzvah in and of itself, not just as a sanctification of the day or as just part of the general celebration. Purim really does stand out as having this eating and drinking as its own thing. So why? The explanation is they made that one should drink on Purim because the story of Ahasuerus from the beginning to the end was only about drinking. So uh, if you read through the book of Esther and you're paying close attention, most of the major events are being triggered at or around various drinking feasts. There were 4 banquets by Achashverosh. The first banquet was made by Achashverosh and Vashti. That was his first wife. And through this, Vashti was killed, which led to Esther taking the crown and redeeming the Jews from the hands of Haman. So that first drinking party was essential to our redemption. Had there not been a drinking feast, we would not have had Esther in a proper position in order to be able to defend our people. The second banquet was when Esther married Achashverosh. The king made a banquet, and through it, Mordecai learned that Bigtan and Teresh wanted to poison the king. So, second major party was the wedding party, which is implied in the text, and this is where Bigtan and Teresh are caught by Mordecai, which is rather important because later Haman had wanted to hang Mordecai, but at the time they read in the chronicles of the king how Mordecai had protected the king from death. That it was because of Mordecai's informing on Bigtan and Teresh that the king had coincidentally, yeah, right, had been reading about that incident immediately prior to Haman asking for special permission to kill Mordecai himself, separate from all of the rest of the Jews. So had that party not happened, Mordecai would not have been in a position to earn the favor of the king, which means that when Haman had gone to the king asking permission to execute Mordecai, he might have been okay with that, and instead of the events as they transpired. So, another one rather important, and doubly so because the king became angry with Haman and said, "You want to hang a good man who protected me from death?" Therefore, the king had Haman hanged. At the very end of the story, when the king is trying to decide what to do with Haman, there is a very helpful suggestion that, well, Haman did make a big stake to kill Mordecai, Mordecai, who was the one that saved the king. And it is that formulation, both that Mordecai was someone who saved the king, as well as that Haman had deliberately erected a means of murder for Mordecai that got the king to finally act. Ahasuerus is indecisive throughout the entire story, and it was this juxtaposition of a device made to murder someone who was somebody that had helped the king was enough to finally convince him that Haman had to go. So again, without that party where Mordecai earned himself this esteem for informing on the traitors, Mordecai might not have been saved, and the whole plot might have carried on against the Jews. Carrying on, Haman wanted to destroy Israel, but the Holy One protected Israel. This is sort of a little bit of an aside, so just bear with it. There is a certain people. This is Haman's introduction to why he wants to kill the Jews. Haman said Israel was a people different in their beliefs, in the Torah, and with their holidays. They observe the Sabbath every 7th day, and every 30 days a new month, Rosh Chodesh. Afterwards, Passover, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret. The Holy One said, "You evildoer, you shout at Israel that they have many holidays. I will give Israel more holidays. This is Purim, that they will hang you. They will be very happy on Purim." So it's just sort of a little bit of a reverse of fortune here, where Haman would have used potentially a mockery of all of our celebrations as a reason why we didn't fit in with the Persians. And God is basically saying, you made fun of us for having too many holidays. Well, we're going to add one, and it's going to be the holiday when you are killed. It's like the old joke of the anti-Semite, whether it be the Tsar, whether it be Hitler or someone else, who asks the astrologer, when will he die? And the answer is, you'll die on a Jewish holiday. And they say, what do you mean? Which Jewish holiday? And they said, no, when you die, it'll be a Jewish holiday. That is an older idea than many people probably think, going back at least back to Ibn Shuaib, who is our commentator. Now let's get back to our banqueting. The third banquet was that the king and Haman sat down to eat and drink, and the king gave him the signet to destroy Israel. This is the third banquet when Esther invites them to come, just the two of them. Remember, she does that twice. This is the first of those two. As soon as Israel became aware that the king had given the ring to Haman, Israel did a great act of repentance. Now that they realize this really is happening, I'm sorry, this is not the third banquet. This is not the one with this is Esther. This is the one where they made the first decision in order to make this scheme against us. They were very frightened. The Holy One redeemed them because of that repentance. We do see that the people were shocked. Indeed, not only were the Jews shocked, but the entire city was shocked at this course of events. All this came because of the banquet. Mordecai and Esther fasted on Passover. Probably didn't know that. Therefore, it is written in the book of Esther, fast on my behalf and do not eat, when Esther is trying to prepare herself to approach the king. Fast and do not eat? Ibn Shuaib asks a question. Why does the verse need to say you should not eat when he said that they should fast? It's redundant. The explanation is that they should fast even on Passover and should not eat matzah on the first night of Passover. Right? So we're fasting and not eating. It is also a positive commandment to drink 4 cups of wine on Passover. So all of that was put on hold because of the dire situation of what was being planned. The fourth banquet was the one Esther made for 2 consecutive days for Ahasuerus, and Haman was hanged as a result of it because she was finally able to corner him and to get the king to act on her behalf. So we have this timeline unfolding, and all of these major events are being triggered by these feasts. Now, Rabbi Ibn Ezra asks a question, also one of the older commentators. Why did Mordecai order all the Amalekites to be killed? Is it not enough that Israel remained alive? This is something that confuses many people who read the book of Esther, especially in the modern world, because it looks like Mordecai and Esther are plotting to murder thousands of people throughout the Persian Empire. How then does that make us any better or different than Haman? Well, shouldn't we have just been happy that Haman had lost? Why do we need to have these retaliatory strikes? Well, the explanation is that Ahasuerus had said to Mordecai, be smart in this matter to protect Israel. Ahasuerus said, I have written letters through Haman to destroy Israel. That is what the first plan was. This letter cannot be canceled or changed. Therefore, now the king commanded that they should keep the first command to kill the Amalekites on the same day. So the major problem in the Persian Empire, and indeed many of the ancient monarchies, was if the king makes a rule, you need to have consistency with the rule. That is to say, if the king makes a rule that says this is allowed, that needs to remain constant, because otherwise there would be constant decision or constant worry that the king will reverse himself on a given matter. This was an attempt at creating stability in what otherwise could be a at-whim form of legislation. And the kings more or less tried to remain bound to this, that the king shouldn't change the law. The king can add, the king can make new edicts, but the king should not be constantly canceling them. It would just be entirely unstable for the kingdom to work like that. And Ahasuerus is pointing this out to Mordecai, that he cannot simply say that the Amalekite group, the people who were working with Haman, can no longer attack Israel, can no longer attack the Jews, because he already gave permission for that. And since he already gave permission, it cannot be revoked. So there is only one alternative, and that is for the Jews to fight back. And they can be given permission to fight, just like the first group was given permission to fight. And then that will take care of the problem, so to speak. It's not an ideal solution. Obviously, monarchies are not the ideal form of government. But under the circumstances, under the legal constraints of the Persian Empire, it was unfortunately necessary for the Jews to be given permission to fight back and thus defeat their opponents, rather than simply canceling the permission for their opponents to wage war against them. And yes, if that seems really back to front and a terrible way to run a country, you're absolutely right. And Persia should have been run differently. But then that's true all the way up until the modern time, when we began to create much more equitable, much more fair, and much more accountable forms of government that could avoid painting itself into a corner where the best solution was to simply kill more people. Not a great way to run a country. So, as you can see with Ibn Shu'aib's interpretations, we are reminded of some of the major mitzvot of the holiday of Purim. We are reminded of some of the major character traits of the Amalekites. And by keeping both of those in mind as we are approaching this Shabbat Zachor, we are able to better prepare ourselves for the holiday of Purim. Yes, we need to be planning what we're serving and what we're drinking and what costumes we're wearing and all of the other fun parts of Purim. That is a huge and important aspect because, like we saw, we got a new holiday out of this. But we also have to take the moral, ethical, and Jewish halachic ideas from this holiday as well. It's not all just sitting back and raising a glass. There's a great deal for us to learn, and a great deal for us to always be on watch for and to always act against in every generation. All right, we'll leave it there for now. And if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to share. But otherwise, we will go ahead and wrap it up. I hope everybody has a wonderful Shabbat, and next week has a wonderful